Today we'll be talking about the history of lawns. Lawns were first seen in Europe. In the 12th century, lawns were first seen and talked about, and they were most likely not really grass, as we think of today. They were dicots, kept at short, carpet-like growths. What we would consider a weed in modern times. In the 13th century, medieval gardens had stuff like chamomile in them. It was more fragrant, it was more aromatherapy than for aesthetic look. In the 14th century, there was hard times going on. You had a lot of death and war, and lawns were really only for the wealthy and at very fancy buildings. But in Japan, they were actually seen. There was zoysia grass used and cut by sickle. The 15th century, the Renaissance came around, but it was still really only for the wealthy to have what we would consider lawns. Common areas are popping up in villages in the 16th century, still only for wealthy people, but seen more in common areas too. Weed control was actually seen in the 17th century, as well as lawns at larger homes, not just at palaces and very high up buildings. In the 18th century, we see people like Capability Brown. He kind of started the wave of landscaping large areas and architectural stuff for lawns and all kinds of vegetation use. The same time, we have the Industrial Revolution happening. Recreation and books were written, and lawn was actually associated with grass at this point. Lawn care practices started to pop up. The reel mower was invented, and that kind of was a huge turning point for the lawn history. Sodding was used, and publications specifically on turf grass was being published. So from there we go over to the American lawn. In America, houses were a bit different. They were arranged around a common area, unlike in England where they were stacked right on top of each other essentially. It was much more rural, obviously, because it was just being settled. Plantations had large lawns, and lands being settled, we saw lawns, but it was more for a functional use for being able to survive where they had just settled. Scything was the original form, but soon was moved to mowing, and it served a functional purpose in this time. Practices started being developed that were very important that time. Clean seed, because sod was kind of the only way of establishing it before then. Fertilizers were being used, and of course the mower. Around the 20s to now, there was a lot of money and development happening. A lot of people had money to grow lawns, and there was competitions for it. Most people had lawns at this point, and it wasn't just for the wealthy. It was kind of a huge turning point for lawn history. Post-war marked a huge industrial boom. There was a lot of stuff that went into the into lawn care industry in terms of equipment and being able to take care of lawns a lot more easy. And that is the history of lawns.